I'm said to be a ghost. The ghost of the White Spire.
It was an unpleasant thought, one Cole had turned over and over again in his mind. They said ghosts didn't exist, that the dead didn't really walk amongst the living, but some people believed in them even so. They believed a dead man could become lost on his way to the Maker's side, forever adrift in a land of shadow. Cole wasn't dead, yet at the same time nobody could see him. He was invisible, and he walked amongst the living. Cole overheard a pair of mages talking about him once. He discovered them late at night huddled in one of the White Spire's dark hallways. There were many such hidden corners in the great tower, places where mages went to escape from the suspicious eyes of watching Templars, and Cole knew them all. Cole knew far less about the mages themselves. He knew, however, they'd taken a great risk sneaking out of their chambers. Few of the tower's Templars were kind, and most of the Templars believed that mages constantly conspired to commit unspeakable horrors, when the truth was usually much more mundane. Most of the mage conversation was just gossip. The mages whispered secrets to one another, sometimes idle speculation about romantic entanglements, and other times much more serious things they knew to be true but could never talk about in the open. Occasionally Cole came upon mages meeting for a romantic liaison instead. They secretly pressed flesh upon flesh, a desperate act of intimacy between people for whom such fleeting moments could only be stolen. Cole found the pair who spoke of him only by chance, overhearing their muted whispers as he passed in the shadows. Some day soon they'd be called away by the Templars for their final ordeal, and Cole would never see them again. Or he'd see them roaming the halls as emotionless tranquil, stripped of their abilities and doomed to spend the rest of their lives in passive service to their tormentors. The homely woman sported a bruise on her cheek, its mottled purple already beginning to fade. From their hiding place the pair watched furtively for any sign of wandering guards, and were startled at the slightest sound. Even the skittering of a passing rat caused them to jump, yet they didn't budge from their hiding place. For all their alertness, they'd been completely oblivious to Cole's approach. Not that he expected anything different. He walked up right beside them, leaning in close to listen.
I tell you, I saw it. I was walking through the lower passages to get a book for Enchanter Garland, and there it was.
Huh. The ghost, right?
So you think there can be dragons but not ghosts? The Chantry doesn't know everything. There could be things in the fate that the Chantry doesn't know about.
It could have been a demon. Come on, girl. You know as well as I do what they teach us. Demons will never seem harmful at first. Only later will they begin to corrupt you.
A single thought ran through Cole's mind.
Did she really see me? Well, maybe you're right. I'll keep an open mind. What did this ghost look like? Maybe it was a Templar.
You think I don't know every Templar in the tower by now? Some of them far better than I'd like.
She touched the bruise on her cheek. The elven mage scowled but said nothing.
No. He wasn't wearing armor, so he wasn't a Templar. And he wasn't wearing a robe, so he wasn't a mage, I don't think. He was just a man. His clothes were dirty. He looked so sad. Like he was lost.
That matches the others' descriptions of him too. Our friends will be so jealous that you saw the ghost of the spire.
Jealous? No. I don't think they should even know. We probably shouldn't tell anyone.
You're right. We probably shouldn't.
They stayed there for a while longer, and Cole lingered. He'd hoped they might talk some more about what the woman saw, but they didn't. They held hands in the dark and listened to the muted sounds of the chant that floated down from the tower's chapel far above. When the midnight service ended, there was nothing left but silence, and the pair reluctantly returned to their chambers. Cole hadn't followed them. Instead, he sat where they sat, letting the silence fill him.
I'm not a demon. I've never even seen a demon. Unless someone can be a demon and not know it, that's just not possible. A ghost, though. Maybe I am a ghost.
Cole remembered when he first came to the tower. Like every other mage before him, he'd arrived in terror, dragged through the halls by a Templar's rough hands. He had no idea where this strange place was, or even how long they'd traveled to get there. Much of the journey had been spent blindfolded and unconscious, and his unsympathetic captors refused to tell him anything. As far as he'd known, they were going to kill him. He remembered being pushed down a dark corridor, empty except for a few apprentices who scurried to get out of the way. Some of them averted their eyes, and that only served to heighten Cole's fear. He was being brought to a dungeon, a black pit, from which he was never going to emerge, for his crime of being a mage. The Templars called him that in very curt, ugly tones when they needed to call him anything.
Mage.
Before that day, it wasn't even a word Cole had associated himself with. It was something he'd only heard on the tongues of priests, a watchword for those who had been cursed by the Maker. And now that's what he was, cursed. They tossed him into a cell. He'd lain there on the damp stone floor, whimpering. He expected a beating, but none came. Instead, the cell door was slammed shut with a deafening crash. While Cole was initially relieved, once the men were gone, that relief evaporated. They left him alone in the dark, with only the rats for company. The creatures scurried invisibly around him, nipping at him with razor-sharp teeth. He tried to crawl away from them, but there was nowhere to go. Nothing to do except curl up into a ball and pray. There in the cold and the nothingness, he prayed for death. Anything would be better than waiting for the Templars to return, anticipating whatever new torment they planned for him. The priest said demons were drawn to mages, to transform them into terrible abominations, but Cole couldn't imagine anything more frightening than the Templars themselves. He couldn't shut his eyes enough to block out the memory of their uncaring eyes. He didn't want to be a mage. He didn't want to discover how one became a mage, and found nothing wondrous in the idea of magic. Fervently, Cole prayed to the Maker over and over and over again for deliverance. He prayed until his voice was hoarse. He prayed for the Templars to forget he even existed. And then, he'd gotten his wish. That's exactly what they did. Perhaps he'd died there in the darkness, and he was forgotten. Maybe that's how ghosts came to be. They were those who passed on and just refused to accept it. Thus, they remained, lingering in a life that didn't want them anymore. He shut his eyes tight and prayed.
Maker above, if I'm dead, then give me a sign. Don't you want me at your side? Just like the chant tree said you would? Don't leave me here. Maybe you won't call me to your side, because I'm not dead. I'm not a ghost. If I am dead, then why do I sleep? Why do I get hungry? Why would I breathe and sweat? These are not things spirits of the dead do. Regardless of the rumors, I am not a demon, and I am no ghost either.
Up above, the white spire swarmed with people. There were many levels in this great tower, filled with sunlight and wide spaces. Cole rarely went up there. He was much more comfortable down below, among the things the Templars had forgotten, as well as the things they wanted forgotten. The bowels of the tower reached deep into the earth, and they were his home. The first few floors of the tower's lower chambers were innocent enough. They contained the kitchen stores as well as the armories, giant chambers filled with enough equipment and weapons to outfit an army of Templars. Beneath that were the archives, rooms upon rooms filled with the books they didn't keep in the upper libraries. There were books about magic there, as well as books of music and philosophy, books in forgotten languages, and even the forbidden books they put under lock and key. Normally the archives stood empty, but sometimes Cole would find a mage spending long hours reading by candlelight. He would never understand what they found so interesting about words and pictures. Books were all just old paper to him. Far more interesting were the levels that lay beneath the archives. The oldest part of the tower was called the Pit, and few but Cole ever explored its depths. There were flooded passages down there, long ago sealed behind bricks, only to crumble from neglect. Rickety stairwells led to ancient storerooms, some filled with only dust, and others with strange-looking relics. A great mausoleum stood as silent testament to Templars who had died centuries ago, faded statues of forgotten heroes towering over marble caskets. He had found hiding places for treasures, the owners of which had long since perished. He had found dark tunnels that went in circles, or had collapsed, or even led into the city's sewers. Did anyone up above even know about these? He knew every part of the pit, all except for the area that lay at its heart. The dungeons were there, hundreds and hundreds of cells on multiple levels, more than the Templars could ever want and far more than they used. The oldest were filled with little more than the silent echoes of the tormented, left like indelible imprints on the stone. It made his skin crawl. Cole avoided the dungeons, only going there when he absolutely had to, when he needed to. Like now. Torches weren't used in the dungeons. Instead, they put glow stones inside glass lamps, things which flickered like flame but cast a cold and blue light. Magic, he knew, for he could feel the whisper of it caressing his skin as he passed. Even so, only a scant few were used, just enough for the guards to see their feet. There was one entrance, an intimidating stretch of hall with a vaulted ceiling and multiple iron gates, which could be closed in an instant. Anyone caught within, when that happened, would be skewered by spikes flying out on the dark holes in the walls. Cole shuddered as he walked through. It wasn't the only death trap in the dungeon. The Templars would rather have their prisoners die than make it out, and the old scorch marks on the walls told of those who made that attempt. On the other side of the hallway was a single guard station, a simple room with a small table and a couple of chairs. He saw an open bottle of wine and 2 half-filled goblets, and plates covered with the cold remnants of the evening meal. A cloak hung on the wall peg, with 2 dirt-smeared helmets sitting on the floor beneath it. No guards were present, and the inner door stood wide open. They must be within. Cole hesitantly stepped into the prison. The stench of fear, old and new, immediately assaulted his nostrils. The cells here were used often. How many prisoners might be present now, he had no idea, though he knew there was at least one. He heard fearful whimpering coming from down the hall. There was laughter, too, along with the idle chatter of 2 men. Their voices echoed. Cole crept inside until he saw the first hints of blue light ahead. 2 armored Templars stood in front of an open cell, one holding up a glow lamp. Neither wore a helmet, and thus he recognized them. Not enough to know their names, for he knew few, but enough to know that these 2 were merciless hunters, Templars who had served their order for so many years that whatever pity they'd once had been capable of had turned into dust.
Careful. This one knows how to conjure fire.
I'd like to see her try.
Don't worry. There wasn't much fight in her when we caught her. Now there's even less.
Do you think she'll make it? Probably better if she doesn't live, anyway.
The Templars turned and walked toward Cole, whispering to each other, a joke, followed by cruel chuckling. He stayed where he was, nervously holding his breath as they drew close. When they reached him, however, they did what most everyone did. They walked around him, completely oblivious that they'd done so. It was never a sure thing, but Cole always half expected someone might see him, half hoped even. Cole stole the keyring from Big Nose's belt as they passed. Then they were gone. The glow lamp was gone with them. Now it was plunged into darkness. Cole slowly let out his breath, waiting for the sound of their footsteps to fade. He could still hear faint weeping behind the cell door. Nearby, water dripped onto stone with a rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Rats squeaked as they emerged from the walls, but he heard nothing in the other cells. If they were prisoners, they were asleep, or as good as asleep. He should move. He tried to will his feet into motion, but they were frozen. He felt immaterial, as if he were made of the same substance as the shadows, and the first step would cause him to be forever lost in them. The panic rose, and his heart pounded. Sweat poured down his face.
Not now. Not yet.
Cole reached out for the wall. Part of him was fearful his hand would merely pass through, that he would stumble and fall, and keep on falling. Down and down he would go, One final scream swallowed by a black oblivion, but his hand touched stone, blessedly cool stone. He grasped gratefully and pressed his face against it, letting its chill hardness scrape his skin. His breathing slowed. He was shaking, but he was still real.
It's not too late.
Fumbling in a pocket, he produced a small bundle of cloth. Carefully, he unfolded it, and the blue radiance of the glowstone emerged. For what was coming next, he would need light. It took several tries until he found the key the Templar used. It turned over so quietly until the lock sprang with a jarring clank. Then he paused. The weeping inside had abruptly halted. Not waiting to see if the noise elicited a response from the guards, Cole pulled the door open and stepped into the cell. The glowstone revealed a tiny cell, encrusted with filth. It was empty except for a single bucket and a girl cowering in the corner, dressed in filthy rags splattered dark with blood. Was it hers? Was it someone else's? The girl's black hair hung in wet ropes down her shoulders, and she protectively shielded her face with her arms. For a long moment Cole did nothing, shifted from foot to foot as he watched her. Then he hunched low, placing the stone on the foot beside him. Its flickering intensified, sending his shadow dancing madly across the walls. He could smell the girl even over the cell's foulness, heavy sweat, laced with sickness. She trembled, no doubt certain he was here to hurt her. So he waited. After a time, a pair of reddened eyes peeked out from behind her arms. She was pretty, or had been once. Now she was haggard, exhausted by whatever ordeal she'd been through to get here. The girl blinked at the glowstone's light, incomprehension warring with terror. She stared at Cole, and he stared back.
You can see me.
The girl yelped as if struck, scrambling to get as far away from him as she could. She backed herself into a corner of a cell like a caged animal, panting rapidly. Her filthy hands clawed at the walls, as if doing so might allow her to get through. Cole waited until her desperate efforts slowed, and she locked eyes on him once again.
You can't see me.
I didn't mean to burn it down. The fire came out of my hands, but I don't even know why. It all happened so fast. I tried to warn them.
The girl clamped her eyes shut, tears spilling down filthy cheeks. She wiped her face with a shaking hand, smearing the dirt across her face. Cole waited. Eventually her sobs quieted, and she looked over at him again, more guardedly this time. Still crouched across from her, he hadn't moved, and he saw the first glimmer of curiosity.
You are clearly not in my cell because you're a Templar. You must be a mage.
No. But my name is Cole.
But if you're not a mage, and you're not a Templar, what are you doing in my cell? What do you want from me?
Cole reached under his leather vest and drew a dagger from his sheath. It was an ornate blade with an elaborate brass hilt, carved in the shape of a dragon's head. The length of it gleamed in the blue light, and the girl's eyes fixed upon it in stark belief.
I came because you can see me. I could feel it when they brought you here. I knew you would see me, even before I met you.
What are you doing with that dagger? Are you going to kill me?
I think so. Yes.
Because I'm a mage?
No. It's not that.
Then why? What have I done to you?
You haven't done anything to me.
Emotion welled up inside Cole, a desperation that he had pushed deep down inside him, now fighting to escape. It left him breathless, and for a moment he cradled his head on his knees and rocked back and forth. Part of him wondered if the girl would use her magic on him while she had the chance. Would she conjure fire like the Templar warned? What would that be like? Could she kill him? But she did nothing. Cole fought to regain his center and exhaled once, long and slow, before looking up again. The girl was frozen. She couldn't look away from his dagger, and perhaps hadn't even considered she could do something to stop him.
I'm fading away. I can feel myself slipping through the cracks. I have to kill you now. I'm sorry.
I'll scream.
You won't scream. Because that will bring the Templars back. Even an armed man killing you quickly is better than the Templars' typical torture and sometimes rape of mages.
Slowly she slumped to the ground, defeated. Cole inched forward. His heart was thumping madly in his chest. He reached out and touched the girl's cheek, and she didn't flinch away.
I can make it go away. The pain. The fear. I can make it quick. You don't have to stay in this prison and see what the Templars have in store for you.
Are you a demon? They say that's what happens to mages. The demons come and turn them into monsters. But I'm already a monster.
She said as a grimace came across her face. Cole didn't respond.
I said I didn't mean to burn it down. That's what I told the Templars too. But I lied.
Her confession spilled out of her like cold venom.
I listened to my mother screaming. My father screamed too. I listened. And I did nothing. I wanted them to burn. I'm glad they're dead.
Her secret told, the girl took a deep breath and blinked back tears. She looked at Cole expectantly, but he only sighed.
I'm not a demon.
Then what are you?
What am I? I'm lost.
He stood and offered his hand. She hesitated, but then numbly nodded. He brought her to her feet, where she stood only inches away. There, in the glowstone's blue light, a strange intimacy enveloped them. He could see every mark on her skin, every stain the tears had left on her cheeks, every strand of hair.
Look at me.
And she did. The girl looked at Cole. She looked into Cole. He was going to kill her, and she knew it. He went through his whole life unnoticed and quickly forgotten by all. But to her, at that moment, he was the most important thing in the world, and that's all he wanted. She knew what he was now. Cole was her deliverance, a way out of a world filled with terror. He saw weary relief in her eyes, mixed with the fear. In those eyes he was anchored, and he felt real.
Thank you.
Cole breathed and plunged the dagger into her chest. She gasped in shock, but did not look away. He thrust up, digging the blade deep into her heart. She convulsed, a spurt of blood erupting from her mouth. Then, with a final shudder, she collapsed into his arms. Cole held her close, staring down into her eyes. He drank in every moment as the life ebbed out of her. It was an instant that seemed to stretch into forever. And then she was gone. Trembling, he allowed the body to slide off the dagger and slump lifelessly to the floor. He was only dimly aware of the warm blood covering his blade, his hands, the entire front of his leathers. He couldn't stop looking at those eyes, staring off into nothing. He knelt down and closed them, leaving a streak of scarlet across her lids. Then he stumbled back, leaning against the cell wall. It was difficult to breathe.
I need to stop doing this.
It took every bit of will he had left, but he tore his eyes away from her. Like a drunken man, he stumbled toward the glowstone and snatched it off the floor, wrapping it back up in the cloth until the cell was plunged into darkness once again. He took slow and deliberate breaths as he brought himself under control. He'd almost forgotten what it was like to be connected, to feel like he belonged in the world. Part of him was certain the Templars were about to come running, and that the entire White Spire would realize all at once who he was, that escaped mage who walked in their midst, the ghost of the Spire. They would come with their spells and their swords, they would wrestle him to the ground, and then he would be locked away in a cell again. He'd be lost in that blackness until they came to deal with him once and for all. This time they would forget him. This time the door would open, and they would see him lying there, and by then he would be begging them to end it. But no one came. No one ever came.